Welcome to Better by Great Place to Work, the podcast that helps companies create a great workplace for all because it's better for people, better for business, and better for the world. I'm Christopher Tkachuk, the Chief Content Officer at Great Place to Work. Each week, we meet with great leaders who have helped their companies become better workplaces by focusing on their best asset, their people, who in turn help their organizations become more successful. Support for Better comes from DHL Express, the global market leader in international express delivery. Welcome to Better by Great Place to Work. We're coming to you from the 2020 Great Place to Work for All Summit in San Francisco, and we're joined today by Ellen McGirt and Tony Bond. Ellen McGirt is a senior editor at Fortune, and Tony Bond is the Chief Innovation and Diversity Officer here at Great Place to Work. Ellen and Tony, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what I want to talk about today is the Diversity and Inclusion Forum, which is a closed-door session that we have had here at the summit for the past, this year and last year. This is the second one. Because I've been in the podcast booth, I have not had a chance to attend the D&I forum. But I just want you, Tony, to sort of explain why we do it, first of all, what it is, who attends, and why it's closed door.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an invite-only session where we try to bring maybe 100 CHROs and Chief Diversity Officers together. And it's really a chance to convene people. It's a difficult journey we're on to create great places to work for all. So we want to create a space where people can come together, have courageous dialogue, leave with some things that they can take back to make their efforts even more impactful in the workplace.
Okay.
And actually expose them some thought leaders as well.
And so who attends?
It's.
I mean, in terms of is it how many people are in the room? Is because it is closed door.
It's closed door.
And is it invitation only?
It's invitation only.
Okay.
It's probably 100. I think we had maybe 130 yesterday.
Okay,
So it was
great.
an even better crowd. We have Ellen and I, Ellen really helps facilitate and co-design the session. We had some speakers from some of our best companies. And in each table, we had some D&I champions, some people who are out there doing work with many organizations to help them get better. So it's a mixed crowd, but mainly at a C-suite level,
Nice.
or VP level.
And so is there sort of an open, because it's a forum, is it an open concept where people can just ask questions at any moment of someone on stage, or they have to sit and listen to someone give a speech and then wait at the end like a regular Q&A, or how does it?
Yeah, we try to create
Yeah.
the experience where there's a little bit of listening, but also a chance to dialogue and connect at tables with others.
Okay.
So we feed information, and then we have a chance for people to process that information, share with others. So it's a combination.
Okay, interesting. Ellen, last year was, of course, our first year doing this, and you participated then too. In terms of your contribution as a moderator, what is the experience like? Are you coming set with a list of questions that you want to ask, with the idea that you can get story ideas out of it, or what is your mission with it?
Well, first, I just want to set the record straight. Tony was very generous with me saying that I helped co-design it, but it really comes from his specific vision about what makes people comfortable enough to have the uncomfortable conversations. And the fun part for me, as a person who has established the race beat and the inclusion beat at Fortune, is that it's a chance for me to not only acknowledge the work that people are doing. I mean, I cover them on a regular basis. Every time someone in the room publishes a survey or makes a new announcement or starts a new program, I cover it and I explore it. So it's a chance for me to understand where they're coming from and what their challenges are. And so from my perspective, I do come in with some questions that I think are be relevant for the audience, but mostly what I'm curious about is what are they working on? What have they stopped working on? What are the barriers they're experiencing? And the tender part is when the barriers they're experiencing are people who are having trouble understanding how to hire and retain and be themselves welcoming to people who are different from themselves. So we end up having, and Tony, I want to check your understanding of this, we end up always washing out into this incredible place of vulnerability, where we're talking about what it feels like to talk with people who don't believe the same things that we do, or for whom difference is a fearful thing. We end up talking a lot about what it means to be tired in the face of doing this work. And once one or two people shares their vulnerable experience, where they are tired, where they are out of ideas, suddenly the room blooms into this cross-talking, vulnerable, here's some tips, here's some solutions, but mostly I hear and see you and I believe in you. And so I always end up leaving twice in a row feeling hopeful and just ready to keep going.
That's great. Yeah. And Tony, can you share a little bit about what was discovered or discussed yesterday?
Sure. It's sort of an off-the-record conversation.
Sure.
But I would say that Ellen...
We're not mentioning any names,
yeah.
but you can tell about what some
Absolutely.
companies are dealing with right now.
Yeah. I think there's some consistency across each company. I think Ellen opened up the conversation magically by asking them what's keeping them up at night. And there were so many similarities with all the panelists around what's keeping them up at night. We have the coronavirus, which is huge. We're all here. Fortunately, we can
You
make
don't
it
have
here.
the coronavirus,
No, we
as
don't
far
have
as
it.
you know.
We're dealing with
it happening in the world
Exactly.
right now. Because if you have it, I'm going to kick you out of the podcast booth.
I opened it with a story that was kind of scary. But no, that's one thing that everyone's facing. But one key topic that came up right away is disappointment in the state of black people in corporate America. You know, how do we get more, not just people in the pipeline, but create more opportunities for people of color? And that's an issue that everyone's struggling with. And so people are very transparent and open about that. Also, there's this fear of even having conversations around D&I. How is it safe for you to say certain things without having it come back on you in a negative way? And so that's one of the biggest challenges, is I think we created that yesterday because through the stories people shared, we made a serious connection with each other. And I think that's probably the underlying thing that needs to happen. We move quickly to try to figure out actions, but we don't have those stories that we share around commonalities, and we can build those connections.
Okay. And is there one particular story that either one of you can think of from yesterday that stands out for you and that you can somewhat, paraphrase or share without revealing too much?
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
Because of the closed door policy?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we should talk about this because off the record is not something that comes naturally to journalists, and we want to be able to get things out into the world, partly because it's how we make our money, but also it's partly how we keep conversations going. But it really is magic, especially for something that's a tender topic. One of the jobs, and this is one of the reasons why I have such respect for Great Place to Work and all of the people that you assembled in the D&I forum, is that the world is challenging and awful for people who don't fit the definition of mainstream culture, whatever that is, wherever they live. And they walk into work with these real heavy burdens on their shoulders. Some of them are generations long about bullying and violence and danger, wealth inequality, the wealth gap. And then they're being required to be representative of wherever they are not part of mainstream culture and do their best work and be the business case for innovation and drive change in their organizations. And now we're asking organizations and people who represent mainstream culture to care about them in a new way and understand what their lives are like outside of work. And that is I have empathy for everyone in that scenario. People who are really trying, assuming noble intent all around, who are really trying to bridge this gap and make a difference in their communities and the world at large. It's a big job. So people felt comfortable sharing stories of where they were diminished at work, where they struggled with and made mistakes within their own families, understanding the changing identities of people in their own families and finding empathy for people who were struggling in the workplace out of those experiences. And I think the irony of not being able to share any of them is that the takeaway was share and disclose as much as you can as a leader, as early and as often as you can, because it will build trust.
Yeah,
Okay.
There were so many great stories. I wish we could share those. One thing that really struck me is how the PwC's CEO, Action for Diversity and Inclusion.
Yes.
Mike shared it on stage, but there were people
On the
audience,
main stage, you
on the
mean?
main stage. There were people in the audience who really just told stories of how that's had a significant impact on their ability to have meaningful conversations around D&I. So it just felt like this ecosystem, that one, act of creating those, I guess, what should I call them? Kind of a strategy to how to roll it out and have conversations has impacted so many organizations. So there were stories where people shared how that's had an impact.
I was
in
shocked.
the workplace. Yeah.
I was shocked. It was a love fest. I mean, I was really
Yeah.
shocked. And at the heart of it, all it is really is teaching people how to speak to other people, which is something that just seems to be, just not happening anyplace else in society. And we have to ask ourselves why that is, why this is such a surprising and welcome addition to the leadership marketplace or leadership conversation. Just stop treating people as assets and machines and start seeing them as people. It feels tremendously risky.
Yeah.
Earlier this morning, I had Tim Richmond from AbbVie come in. He's the Chief Human Resources Officer. And I remember him saying this morning that, one of their sort of principles is that they treat everyone equally with dignity and respect. So it's the same exact thing you just said. One of the things that I keep hearing yesterday and now today when we're talking about D&I, and there's a word that has been added to that, and again, AbbVie adds the word equality. So they look at it as EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion. So how many more letters are we going to be adding? Is this going to become like the LGBTQ plus?
I know. I guess, Tony, what do you think? I feel like we're going to keep switching in words and letters until we hit on something.
I think so.
Last year it was welcoming.
Right.
Which is a W.
Yeah.
So we're going to need a new acronym there.
Yeah, we're speaking a lot about belonging. So there's so many different ways we're referring to
and
this.
becoming.
Becoming,
Yeah.
right. And if Tony Profit from Salesforce were here, he would say equity.
Yes. Well, that's the other thing that I was going to bring up is that gender equity is a term that I hear a lot. We discussed it yesterday. We had Tina Chen from Time's Up Foundation here, and that's all we talked about, of course.
Yeah.
But when it comes to talking about equity, women in leadership positions especially, as well as pay disparity, which I know we talked about this last year, what are companies doing actually to close that gap and to make sure that everybody is treated fairly and equally?
Yeah. I think it starts with, it feels like we're doing a much better job of having parity at the entry-level roles, but for some reason we have a difficult time promoting women, people of color. And so I know a lot of organizations are really focusing on it. Someone mentioned yesterday that we tend to allow a scenario to unfold where, let's say I'm coming into an organization and I'm a black male. I don't see anyone like me at the very top. And so it's on me to figure out how to navigate and create opportunities for myself. And organizations who get it are doing more to help that person. It's not, they have to figure out how to be successful. But we realize the limitations, and we're going to help you from day one figure out how to navigate and create opportunities for yourself. So I think it's shifting the responsibility off of the person to the organization to help people advance.
Exactly. And when it comes to pay, where it becomes a pretty tangible look at who's treated and how they're being treated, it's way more complicated than people think it is to figure out where people are on the pay spectrum and if they're being paid fairly based on their male peers. And it's even more complicated when you break it down by race, which Citigroup did recently. And you have to do it repeatedly because as people leave and as you hire people, you have to check in where they're coming, and it's just create a system where you're constantly or continually checking to make sure people are being hired at the right level, pay level, and being paid and then promoted at the right pay level actually requires a certain amount of systemic change. So there are few people are really doing it and leading it and getting it right. Cisco, obviously, Salesforce, and Citigroup has really made a splash in the last year. But when I talk to these CEOs and these leaders, I'm always surprised. It's a little bit like starting up an entire internal software or data collection engine. And if you don't have the budget or the stomach for that, and you're not really committed to that process as a leader, it's just not going to happen.
One of the things that I find surprising is how many companies still will not share their demographics of their workforce. And so, and I've had this conversation a lot over the past few months with some of the folks that we're writing stories about as part of our best workplaces lists in the articles that we contribute to Fortune. And I'm wondering yesterday if that came up and if there was a valid reason for companies not to be transparent.
It didn't come up yesterday. We had a pretty woke group who wants to share as much as they can. I bring it up constantly. And if there's anybody out there in listening land who has an intern they can share with me to help me with FOIA requests, this is something that we haven't been able to do for a long time. It would make such a difference.
That's the Freedom of Information Act request.
Correct.
That journalists use dealing with the government.
Correct.
And,
There's all kinds of reasons to use them. They're all, and there's all kinds of pressing issues in the world. But I promise you, I think, 14 or 15% of the Fortune 500, the cohort that I most look at, makes their numbers public, and I know they collect them because they're required by law to collect them and submit them to the EOC. This would not be hard. Underrepresentation is an embarrassing problem to have, especially as corporate leaders are under pressure to be to comment on social issues, to think about how they are impacting their community in new ways as the world gets more complicated. It is a glaring problem that they have that's easy to see, and I know that they resist sharing these numbers. The argument I've heard that is completely invalid in my view is that it's a competitive advantage. If you...
That's all they ever say is
right.
They don't want their competitor to know.
It's proprietary. It's like if I publish my numbers and I have three black people, you're going to poach my 3 black people. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's like as if they're the only 3 that are...
I know. Instead, I just have to spend all my time sort of scrolling through LinkedIn to find them. I promise you I will find them. But just making that number public would give people a way to benchmark. They would become more comfortable sharing best practices, what they've abandoned. And as I know there's a lot going on at Google right now, and they're having all kinds of internal issues, but the greatest thing they did on this subject was make their numbers available, because suddenly all the tech companies did it.
Yeah.
And it really helped.
Yeah. I would agree that you hear the competitive advantage. I mean, we're all at certain points of our journey of creating inclusive cultures, and so I would hope that people can be more transparent, but it seems to be a situation where we don't want to be embarrassed or show that we're not, living up to it, and so we keep that information pretty close.
Well, you know what I've learned to do, and actually Tim Ryan at PwC had really sort of walked me through some of the difficulties of finding pockets of resistance or people who are resistant who don't understand and walking them through it, is I've learned not to be snarky or negative when I review a diversity report. It takes longer than people think it does. And I may be upset that year after year the numbers aren't changing very much, but I've learned to ask why and skip the snarky headline. And it really, I think, helps change the culture. That we're not here to trip you up. We're here to find out what will work.
Is there a headline recently from one of your columns that you used that you got a lot of feedback on? Just the headline alone that you can think of.
Everyone is racist.
And what was said?
The
worst that was said and then the best that was said.
When you talk about racism as a set of ideas that we don't examine, a culture that we walk through every day that affects all of us from different perspectives, it becomes a conversation that we can all have as opposed to a group that is being singled out for doing it wrong. And that makes a big difference, I think. And Dr. Ibram Kendi, who wrote Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, did the world such a service by framing these issues as a set of ideas that we accept without thinking, or sometimes accept because we believe that they are true and haven't examined them. And in his latest book, he starts by talking about the insidious way that he himself had come to accept racist ideas, that black people were just one bootstrap pull up from solving all their problems and being rewarded for those ideas as a young man in his own community. And it opened the door for me to think about how I can write about racist ideas in a way that we can all be invited to examine them. I do love a good call out as much as the next person, but I think that's more productive.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by DHL Express, the global market leader in international express delivery. Recognized globally on Great Place to Work's World's Best Workplaces list, DHL Express makes a positive contribution to the world by connecting people and enabling global trade, while being committed to responsible business practices, purposeful environmental activities, and corporate citizenship. Learn more at dhl.com. Tony, you're meeting with some of our clients every so often and talking about D&I.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with our listeners some of the advice you seem to be giving quite often when you're meeting with clients?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we explored this yesterday. Sometimes, and I use the analogy, sometimes it feels like D&I exists in this lake. It's like a confined area, and we try to bring people into it and help them understand why it's important, whereas it needs to be a river. It needs to just move through everything that you're doing. So some of the conversations is really, and we talked about this yesterday, how do you look at this not as something separate, but if you're putting a team together and you're trying to accomplish something, how do you do it through the lens of inclusion? If you're trying to create products, how do you do it through the lens of inclusion? So let's not make it a standalone thing, but it's a part of everything, whether you're hiring people, whether you're into corporate social responsibility, whether you're into product development or strategy, it's a part of every conversation. So it's opening it up. And the other part is how do you help leaders understand this? And it's difficult to get every leader to really lead as a for-all leader, what we consider a for-all leader. It's a journey. And so we talk about how do we get all our leaders enrolled in being an inclusive leader. That's a big conversation.
Yeah. I wanted to sort of change the topic to some recent news that Ellen has been working on in her Race Ahead column, which I've said before, and I'll say it again and again and again. The last time she visited us, I told all of our listeners to subscribe to her newsletter, which is, I believe, still free because they've put up some sort of paywall on Fortune.com.
100% still free.
Excellent. So all you do is put your email address in, and every day, weekdays, she sends out sort of the most important news you need to know around the conversation around diversity, inclusion, and race. It's a daily must-read. So go to Fortune.com and sign up for it.
I would agree. If I read no other emails during the day, that's the one.
I mean, Fortune does a lot of newsletters, but it's my favorite one.
Yeah.
So Ellen, what are the biggest stories that you've been either breaking or telling recently?
It is a good question, and thank you for that. That really lifts my spirit. Michael Bush just gave a shout out for Race Ahead on the stage, and he said you may need to watch something uplifting afterwards. And I totally understand that. I had a wonderful longtime reader send me an email a couple of months ago saying that she had done a word cloud assessment of my last 3 weeks of columns, and I'd used the word grim 32 times. Am I all right? So one of the things I try to do is do a mix of evergreen things that I think are important for people to understand who are practitioners or who are just trying to be better at this in the workplace. So we cover expert advice on things like microaggressions, what they are, new ways of thinking about what it means to be an ally. You can't give yourself the label of ally. Somebody has to really give it to you because you have to take a risk on behalf of somebody else. But then every now and then something happens like a beautiful, beloved athlete falls from the sky. And so my Sunday column that I was ready to publish on Monday had to go by the wayside, and then we had to talk about Kobe Bryant. Because he was a complicated person in our lives, and he was a complicated person for a variety of reasons, and rather than weigh in on you should care about him for this, and this is how I feel about the allegations and his apology for rape earlier in his career, was we are all going to be grieving a different part of what he meant to us. He was highly compensated, he was very famous, he was part of a big engine that brings people into our lives, and he meant something different to different people. And he meant something to people who were going to feel triggered by the way that his story unfolded as opposed to the way his accuser's story unfolded. So that was an opportunity to talk about what it means to be a person who grieves in a different way and who walks in the world in a different way that now has to walk into work and work together. So I appreciated the opportunity to talk about it, and I appreciated the opportunity just to encourage people to be gentle with each other. I mean, it was a legitimate shock.
Oh, yeah.
He was doomed in no particular way.
Right.
He wasn't reckless or sick or experiencing any chaos in his life. So the grief was pure, and there was no one to blame.
No. Yeah.
Ellen, in the course of you covering this for so many years now, you have an amazing network of contacts and sources. which I envy just because, I mean, you seem to know everyone. You're a great networker. What, in terms of how you get a story, is it because someone tips you off? Are there ever those kind of emails or calls from someone who says, "Oh, I need to tell you about something," but do you ever get that kind of like secretive inside knowledge from people that you can't really write about yet because it's either off the record or?
Yeah. Every now and then, not as often as I would like. All tips welcome. All promises for off the record on background will be kept.
Right.
But I do think, and I know that this probably is part of your life too, your amazing transition into the work that you're doing now, is that showing up really matters.
No.
For something like this is tender topic for people, and seeing you and hearing you speak, or just hearing you ask questions in person, the things that you disclose in part of conversation make all the difference in establishing this kind of beat. And I'm lucky enough that I'm able to, I'm on the rubber chicken circuit every spring and every fall, and I do get to go to a lot of conferences where I see people time again. Now we're cautioned not to touch anybody. It's been so hard not to hug people.
Yeah.
Because you see them every time. This time next year, it's like real relationships happen here.
And Ellen is referring to, of course, dealing with the coronavirus being in the world today, and that at the summit this year we took many extra precautions to make sure that we're not shaking hands. There's no hugging. We're doing little elbow bumps. Some people are doing toe touches.
You took very good care of us this year, and it was not a natural thing not to just hug everybody I ran into. But if you want to develop connections on the race and inclusion beat, you do have to show up in person, and people have to get to know you. And one of the things that I'm very lucky for is that Race Ahead really is in my voice. I wanted to make it distinct from some of the other Fortune editorial products that cover a sector. These are objective things. These are human stories. So the newsletter sounds like me, and I try to make sure that when I write about other people, it sounds like them.
And that's why we read it.
Thank you. I love you, Chris.
I love you too.
I love you, Tony.
I love you too.
From a distance.
So one last topic that I have to address, which because it is going to be on everyone's mind for even months after we first publish this episode, is the fact that we are coming upon this election in November, and diversity and equality are not part of the conversation in the way that they need to be. And I think that it's the media is to blame for a lot of that. Because they're the ones who are going to be asking the questions, whether it be on the debate stage.
Right.
If you had an opportunity to moderate the next debate, what would you ask?
That's a powerful question.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Just one question, but it has to be around what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Tony, would you ask about reparations?
I don't know if I would.
You know what I mean? It is. If you only had one thing, it is a way to talk about generations.
It's so divisive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why, and they, with the current crop, I think the answers would be largely unsatisfactory.
Right.
So we'd really be looking for a question that would reveal their thinking. And where I find Sanders falls short is that. Although he has interesting ideas about economic inequality, that is not the solution for the racism that people are experiencing in this country. And I think that's where he stops thinking.
I would have to find a question. I don't know if I really understand their views on this whole topic.
That's what I'm
personal
saying,
views.
Because nobody's asking.
No one's asking.
Right.
So I would have to almost frame up the current situation and then ask them how do they feel about it and how does that apply to them as a person, not even as a politician or potential president, but get to know them and their views, because I don't at this point. And I'm a little disappointed because I know that regardless of who I'm interested in, we've had some debates where women have shown up pretty good, even better than the men.
100%.
And now we've gotten to a place where, they're not even in the running anymore. So I don't quite understand that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. One of the things I do want to point out, though, is that, we did have the first out gay man running for president get as far as he did.
Right.
And because of that, CNN hosted a town hall specifically about LGBT issues. I mean, that is another milestone.
Yeah.
Where the
It really
media
is.
was doing the right thing.
Yeah,
Right.
and we need to celebrate that. And earlier on, MSNBC partnered with She the People, and they had an entire forum just on issues facing Black women and their families. And most of the candidates showed up then. That was a robust conversation about things like Black maternal health.
Right.
And disparities in outcomes in schools. I mean, they really did a great job there, but it didn't stick. It wasn't baked in, and we end up talking about corn pop, and we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
That was a Biden joke.
One of the things I learned from yesterday is I knew this, but it was reinforced. We all have stories, and our stories involve hurt, pain, feeling excluded, and just by hearing people's stories, whether I even know you, there's an instant connection I have with you. And so I think we often have a conversation around how we're different and honoring the differences, but I think it needs to be a balance. If we can have more storytelling and hearing people's stories, it creates that connection, and that connection builds the right for us to have those difficult conversations, which ordinarily we wouldn't be able to. So maybe it's a question that helps the candidates reveal their story and just get to know them better.
Maybe it's just a different format. I mean, I know we're on audio now. The pageantry of the way the debates have unfolded, if they were on audio and people were sitting down and had a chance to not worry about what their hair looked like or just how presidential they appeared, and just were encouraged to tell stories that were meaningful. I think that might be, we could listen to them, we could bring them into our psyche that way and not worry about the optics.
Right.
I think that might be a better way to have a
The
conversation.
closest we got to someone becoming or being authentic on stage, on a debate stage, was it the Nevada debate, where the question was, what's a misconception that people have about you? And Elizabeth Warren's was that she doesn't eat, which I thought was funny.
Yeah.
And she's very witty. But as a follow-up, did you guys see the Colbert video with her, where he took her to a restaurant in Charleston?
I saw some of that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a must-watch. It's so funny. And
It was Scrooge McDuck has no pants.
Yeah.
That one.
It's so good.
Yeah.
But I loved seeing how, we have a presidential candidate who is not only very witty, but could match him for joke for joke,
Yeah.
So it would be nice to see someone who's that clever.
Right.
It would be nice. It would be nice to have someone who could just fold a fitted sheet. I'm just basic household competence.
If you know how to do it, you need to teach me.
That's really good.
Right. I mean, that means Martha Stewart 2020.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the
Well,
only one.
this has been fun. I think it's a great way to end because we have to begin our next interview.
Okay.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Ellen. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Chris.
having us
Thank you,
on.
Ellen.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. You've been listening to Better by Great Place to Work. The producers are Lizelle Festejo and Katie Van Geffen. Audio and video production is by Resonate Recordings. Better is generously sponsored by DHL Express, the global market leader in international express delivery. Tell us about your great workplace experience by finding us on social media. We can be reached on Facebook and LinkedIn at Great Place to Work, and on Twitter and Instagram at GPTW_US. Also tell your friends about Better, which can be found wherever you download your favorite podcasts.